The sound of the heart monitor was the only thing keeping me grounded.
Beep, beep.
Beep. Then silence. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. My fingers stayed wrapped around my brother's cold hand, as if I could pull him back with the warmth of my touch. The nurses moved quietly around us, their eyes filled with that polite, professional sorrow I'd seen too many times today. "Take all the time you need," one of them whispered. But there was never enough time. I brushed a stray lock of hair off his forehead, my thumb trembling as it passed over the faint scar he'd gotten as a kid. I could still hear him laughing that summer, teasing me for crying over a broken ice cream cone. And now, I was crying again, only this time, it wasn't ice cream melting. It was everything we never said to each other. When I finally stood up, my legs felt heavy, like the floor was made of grief. I tucked his hospital tag into my coat pocket, something to hold on to, and walked out of the ICU. The hallway was too bright, too clean, too alive for a world that had just lost him. And then I heard it. A soft hum.
Low.
Familiar. It was our song, the one we used to sing in Dad's old Chevy, the one only he and I knew. I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. Because the voice wasn't in my head. It was coming from the end of the hall. The last time I saw my brother before the hospital, we weren't speaking. Not really. It was 2 years ago, a gray, rainy evening that matched the mood inside my tiny apartment. The air smelled like burnt coffee and resentment. He'd shown up unannounced, soaking wet, his hoodie dripping onto my rug. "Can we talk?" he'd asked, his voice low, cautious, like he already knew I was going to say no. I remember standing there, arms crossed, my laptop still glowing behind me. I was in the middle of a work project, trying to prove myself in a new city, paying rent on time for the first time in my life. I didn't want chaos again. Not his chaos. "Talk about what, Ryan?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "About how you borrowed Mom's savings and disappeared for 6 months. Or how you got arrested in Vegas." He flinched, looking down. The guilt on his face made it harder to stay angry. "It wasn't like that," he murmured. "I was trying to fix things, Claire. I messed up. I always mess up." He stepped closer, pulling something out of his pocket, a tiny silver keychain shaped like a compass. "Dad gave this to me before he passed. Said it'd always point me home. I want you to have it." I stared at it, the little compass spinning wildly, like it couldn't decide which way was north. "Home," I said bitterly. "There is no home, Ryan. Not anymore." He looked like he wanted to say something else, something important, but I was too tired to hear it.
Too angry.
I shut the door before he could finish his sentence. For weeks, I avoided his calls. Then, the calls stopped. I told myself it was better this way. Clean breaks hurt less in the long run. But every now and then, I'd catch myself checking my voicemail, hoping he'd left one last message. He never did. Until now, standing in that hospital hallway, years later, hearing our song echoing faintly through the air, I realized that maybe this was his way of finishing that sentence. The one I never let him say. After Ryan disappeared from my life, I told myself I was done looking back. The first few months were rough. The silence felt heavier than any fight we'd ever had. I threw myself into work at the hospital, volunteering for night shifts, chasing promotions, pretending the exhaustion was ambition. In a way, it was. If I kept moving, maybe I wouldn't have to feel. I was 29 when I earned my nurse practitioner license, a milestone I celebrated alone with a cheap bottle of champagne and a takeout box of noodles. I posted a modest photo on social media, grateful for new beginnings. What I didn't post was the truth, that I was terrified, that I was still waiting for a text from a brother who'd vanished like he'd been swallowed by the earth. Over the years, I learned to smile through the ache. I bought a small condo, painted the walls sage green, and started collecting houseplants I mostly forgot to water. My life looked calm, even enviable. People saw me as the steady one, the reliable one. If only they knew how many nights I'd fallen asleep clutching that little silver compass, the one Ryan had tried to give me. I finally accepted it weeks after that argument, mailed to my doorstep in a small padded envelope with no return address. The note inside only said, "In case you ever lose your way, Sometimes I'd hold it under the lamp, watching the needle twitch and spin, wondering where he was, whether he still had the same song saved on his phone. Then, one morning last winter, everything shifted. An older nurse named Marjorie, who'd worked in the ICU for 30 years, pulled me aside after a brutal 12-hour shift. "You've got good instincts, kid," she said, her silver hair tied back in a bun. "But you work like you're punishing yourself." Her words hit harder than I expected. Maybe because they were true. Marjorie became something like a mentor. She taught me to pace myself, to breathe between emergencies, to let go of the guilt that didn't belong to me. She even encouraged me to apply for a hospital management program. 6 months later, I was running the trauma unit, the youngest head nurse the hospital had ever had. People congratulated me, but I didn't tell them what it really meant. That every life I helped save, every patient I refused to give up on, was my way of making up for the one person I couldn't save, or maybe wouldn't let save himself. I built a name, a purpose, a life that looked complete from the outside. But some nights, when the hallways were quiet and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, I'd still hear him. Ryan's laugh, his guitar, the faint echo of our song carried by memory. And I'd wonder if somewhere, somehow, he was proud of me. The sterile hum of machines is something you never get used to, no matter how many years you've worked in a hospital. But this time it was different. This time I wasn't the nurse. I was the family. When they called me earlier that morning, "He's critical, you should come," my mind went blank. I remember dropping the coffee I'd just poured, watching it splash across the floor, and whispering, "Ryan," like saying his name might change the outcome. By the time I reached the ICU, his body was still fighting, but his spirit, I could feel it fading. His skin was pale, his lips dry, his chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. The doctor said the infection had spread too far, that it was only a matter of time. I stood there, my heart breaking in slow motion. All the things I wanted to say, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, I missed you," tangled in my throat. He opened his eyes once, just barely, and smiled. It was weak but real. The corners of his mouth lifted, like he knew I'd come. "Hey, sis," he whispered. His voice was so faint, I had to lean close to hear him. "Don't talk," I said softly, holding his hand. But he shook his head slightly. "I kept it safe." "Kept what safe?" I asked, tears already blurring my vision. He didn't answer. His gaze drifted toward the nightstand beside the bed. A small, battered leather notebook lay there. I picked it up, confused, but before I could ask again, the monitors around us began to scream. His body jolted once, then went still. The doctor rushed in. The nurses followed. I stepped back as the chaos unfolded, compressions, injections, orders being shouted in clipped tones, and then the silence that always follows when there's nothing left to do. Time froze. My brother was gone. I pressed my forehead to his hand and whispered everything I should have said years ago. "I forgive you. I love you. Please forgive me too." When I finally stepped out of the ICU, the notebook clutched to my chest. I felt hollow, like my heartbeat had been left behind in that room. The hallway outside was long and white and too bright. I was halfway to the elevators when I heard it, a faint melody echoing through the corridor. At first, I thought it was just another patient's radio, but then the words sank in. It was our song. The same silly tune Ryan and I made up as kids, singing into hairbrushes, screaming the lyrics out the car window. No one else could have known it. I froze. My pulse pounded in my ears. The sound came from somewhere near the waiting lounge. I followed the music, each step slower than the last. The melody grew clearer, and then stopped. When I turned the corner, the lounge was empty. Just rows of gray chairs and the flicker of a vending machine light. But on one of the chairs sat something that made my breath catch, a hospital locker key, taped to a folded note with my name on it. I peeled the note off carefully. The handwriting was Ryan's, shaky, but his. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Don't cry. You'll find what I meant by I kept it safe. Locker 27B. Open it, Claire. You'll understand everything." My hands trembled. The silver compass in my pocket felt suddenly heavy. Locker 27B. My brother was gone, but somehow he'd left me something behind. And as I turned toward the ICU wing again, I could have sworn I heard his voice, faint, soft, fading, humming the rest of our song. The locker room in the basement was cold and smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. I'd walked through this corridor 1,000 times before as a nurse, but never with shaking hands and a racing heart. Locker 27B stood near the back, a thin layer of dust on the handle. The key slipped once before clicking into place. When I pulled the door open, a small cardboard box sat inside with my name scrawled across the top. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Ryan and me as kids in the backyard, covered in mud. Ryan holding his high school diploma. Ryan with Mom on her birthday, years before she passed. Every photo was worn around the edges, but carefully stored. And beneath them was a folder, hospital letterhead, sealed. I unfolded the papers with trembling fingers. It wasn't medical records, it was a foundation charter. The Hudson Hope Fund, signed under my name. I frowned. I had never heard of it. But as I flipped through the documents, realization began to settle in. Ryan had been transferring money, small amounts over the years, to fund patients who couldn't afford emergency treatment. My patients. Every dollar he'd earned, legally or not, he'd poured into helping others through me. There was another envelope tucked at the bottom. My throat tightened as I opened it. Inside was a letter written in his messy, familiar handwriting. Claire, you always thought I was the lost one. Maybe I was. But I wasn't running from you. I was running for you. After Dad died, I didn't want you to see how bad it got. I made mistakes, yeah. Big ones. But the one thing I never stopped doing was believing in you. The foundation's in your name, because you saved me more times than you'll ever know. Every shift you pulled, every life you touched, it reminded me there's still good left in us. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't make it out this time. Don't blame yourself. Just promise me one thing. Keep the compass close. And keep helping people find their way home, the way you helped me. Love, Ryan. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, not the quiet, polite kind of crying I'd mastered at work, but deep, ugly, shaking sobs that came from years of guilt breaking apart. He'd never stopped believing in me, even when I stopped believing in him. The power had shifted, not from weakness to strength, but from misunderstanding to truth. I thought I'd been the one saving others all these years. But he'd been saving me, too. When I left the basement, dawn was breaking over the city, the first pink light catching on the hospital windows. I held the compass in my palm, watching the needle steady itself. For the first time in years, I knew exactly where north was. A week later, I stood outside the hospital courtyard, the air crisp with spring. The foundation had been officially registered in both our names now, the Hudson Hope Fund, for patients without a voice. It was strange seeing my name engraved next to his. Strange and beautiful. We held a small ceremony, just a few nurses, Marjorie, and a handful of patients who'd benefited from Ryan's anonymous donations. I didn't tell them everything. Some things weren't meant to be explained. That night, I went home and opened the notebook he'd left behind. Inside, between sketches and song lyrics, I found a small photograph, the two of us as kids, sitting in Dad's old Chevy, grinning wildly, my pigtails crooked, his hands pretending to drum on the dashboard. On the back of the photo, he'd written one line. You always sang the wrong words, but you never stopped singing. I laughed through my tears. It felt good, raw, alive. I took the photo to the window, where the city lights blinked below like distant stars. Then I placed it beside the compass on my nightstand. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by the past. I felt guided by it. The song that had followed me through that hallway still played in my mind, soft, warm, forgiving. It no longer scared me. It reminded me that love doesn't vanish when someone's gone. It lingers. It echoes. It hums quietly in the spaces between heartbeats. I looked up at the sky and whispered, I hear you, Ree. Then, in my mind, I could almost hear him answer, laughing that same easy laugh, tapping along to our melody. And as the city settled into night, I realized something simple, something certain. After spending hours in the ICU, after saying goodbye, after walking away thinking I'd lost everything, I finally understood what I was hearing that day. It wasn't just our song. It was him leading me home,